Okay, good morning. I think we're going to get rolling here. Welcome, everybody. And this is a daunting podium, by the way. I may stand over there. Built for tall people. I'm Holly Trollenberg. I am the new dean of the Wagner School of Public Service. To welcome you all to Wagner's pretty new home in Union Square. It's a beautiful building, is it not? So thrilled to have you here. Thrilled to be joining with Common Cause New York, the NYU McSilver Institute for Policy Poverty Research, Citizens Union, and CUNY Grad Center. We're delighted to have you join us for this very timely discussion of ranked choice voting. I'll be quick because we have an amazing lineup of speakers and panelists today, many of whom I actually had the privilege of working with in my 2 previous roles ago, City's Transportation Commissioner, including both the current and former City Comptroller. So special welcome to Scott Stringer and Brad Landry next spring. So I just want to note there will be a Q&A portion of this discussion at the end of the event. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, former commissioner, former Manhattan Deputy Borough President, Rose Pierre-Louis, and now Executive Director of the McSilver. Rose, I want to thank you for all your years of public service. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Oh my God, I know we got. Good morning, everyone. It is great to see all of you. I'm Rose Pierre-Louis, Executive Director of the McSilver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research, and it's great to be here with all of you this morning. I just said to Polly, one of the best things NYU just did was to appoint your dean of the Wagner School, and we're so excited. So excited to be working with you. Thank you for hosting us in your beautiful space. So since 2020, I served on the board of Rank the Vote NYC, and I've worked on a number of community advocacy and outreach efforts. As we know, New York City is the single largest and most diverse jurisdiction in the country utilizing ranked choice voting. The city has become a model for how RCV can be used successfully as well as implemented. And it has also been embraced by voters and candidates alike. I look forward to hearing from our esteemed panelists. And before we begin, I'd like to introduce Stephen Romalewski, who is the director of the CUNY Mapping Service, which is a project of the Center for Urban Research at the CUNY Graduate Center. Steve and his team for years has provided invaluable insights and data on elections in the city and the use of RCV. Steve, welcome.
Thank you. Aaron, it didn't work to hold the mic, so a little flustered. So let's see. Where do I point this? Whoever it is. There we go. So my team I appreciate the introduction. Thank you very much. Really glad to be here. Thanks for everyone being here as well. My team at the Center for Urban Research, led by distinguished Professor John Hollenkoff. I'll show some slides of maps that we've prepared so far, which is part of a larger effort we're undertaking with support from New York Community Trust and Fair Vote to analyze the results from this ranked choice voting election. From the primary, we'll focus today on the mayoral race, but we'll also be looking at borough president, city council, and analyzing that as well. So when the Board of Elections published the ranked choice voting results, they used a technique called batch elimination, which didn't show all of the rounds of vote transfers that happened when each candidate that receives the least amount of votes is eliminated, then their votes, if there are rankings below that for candidates above them, get transferred to those higher vote-getting candidates. In this election, unlike in 2021, all of the candidates below Zoran Mamdani and Andrew Cuomo, all of their votes would have transferred, and it still wouldn't have affected the outcome in terms of who won and who lost. So the Board of Elections didn't really need to publish all of the rounds of the vote transfer, but we wanted to look, and I think it's interesting to look at the transfers from each candidate and to see citywide, which is what this shows, how those votes transferred. It's not as varied as it was in 2021. There were more candidates and there were lower vote getting candidates got more votes than the lower vote getting candidates this time. So there was more transfer activity. But you can see that in that last round of voting, Comptroller Lander's votes and all of the votes he accumulated from the other candidates below him, that really made the difference in terms of the strength of the vote at the end. And so when his votes transferred, that caused Zoran Mamdani's vote share to jump from 46% to 56%. You see that line going up to Mamdani. And you can see that there were some of his votes that got transferred to Cuomo, but 3 times as many got transferred to Mamdani. And so that really made the difference in that final vote share. So here are 2 maps that show the patterns for Mamdani and Cuomo from the first round of voting to the final round. And you can see the contours of the vote share with the electoral districts in red going to Cuomo and in blue going to Mamdani. Didn't change that much, but you can see that those transfers really boosted the vote share in each election district for Mamdani and really strengthened his vote in the areas where he did well. And I should say we have these maps. You can see the link at the top at our New York City election atlas, so you can see these and more. Let's see, would we transfer? Oh. There we go. So in addition to the candidate results, the vote results that the Board of Elections publishes in a format called the cast vote record enables us to look at a lot of different things, such as how extensively voters used the rankings on the ballot. And so in this case, this map shows the share of voters by election district that used the full ballot, that chose and used all 5 rankings. It increased from 2021 for the mayoral election, or just over 40% used all 5 ballots. Now almost half of the electorate used all 5 rankings. And you can see that the darkest green areas are where the share of voters that used all 5 rankings was above average, which kind of pretty much closely matches where Mamdani did very well, which either means people in those areas were really hedging their bets, or more likely it means that the Mamdani campaigning was getting the message out that people should really use the full ballot, and they responded to that. And you can see that people used all 5 ranks all over the city. There were some exceptions where they wasn't as prevalent, such as Borough Park and South Williamsburg, where Cuomo did well. But otherwise, it was a pretty impressive showing for the use of ranked choice voting for the mayoral election. There we go. Another metric or way of looking at how well people use the ballot or not is so-called bullet voting, and you just rank one candidate. I should point out also, I didn't include a slide on this, but going back to the number of rankings, I think 78% of the voters ranked multiple candidates. So it was, even though some people didn't rank all of them, it was even an improvement on that score as well from 2021 to 2025. So so-called bullet voting, where you just rank one candidate either once or more than once, you're allowed to do that, wasn't as prevalent this time, which I think for Mamdani is consistent with the number of voters ranking all 5, using all 5 rankings. Although you can see there are some patterns where people decided to just rank him. And this is the pattern for Cuomo, where you can see that bullet voting, people just ranking him, was definitely more prevalent in the areas where he did especially well, which were also areas that Eric Adams did well in 2021. So again, we're going to be developing more robust analysis of looking at the vote patterns compared with demographic characteristics across the city. We'll also be looking at, we're working with Laura Tamman from Pace University to interview candidates, their campaign staff and consultants to ask them to kind of tease out how they used ranked choice voting and how that impacted their strategies. For sure, talking with candidates, Stringer's office and Langer's office. But in the meantime, we've created an interactive map that shows the vote transfers and the vote results for each candidate, for each round, the full 10 rounds, 9 rounds. And you can see how the votes changed, where the vote strength was. I don't know if we'll have time to go to the demo of this, but you can see the link at the top. And it really gives you a rich picture of what the electoral patterns were and what that means for electoral politics, what that means for neighborhood change, and what that means for vote support for these candidates. And you could overlay council districts. We'll probably also add congressional districts to that. So it's a really detailed picture. So hopefully that's very helpful. In 2021, we did a detailed report with Common Cause. We'll be working with Common Cause again to get the results of our analysis out to people that need it most. And so we're looking to move forward on that right away.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. I'm Susan Lerner. I'm the Executive Director of Common Cause New York. And thanks to Steve and his team at CUNY for this excellent snapshot look at New York City voters' RCV behavior. I want to urge everybody, you're here because you're interested in RCV, spend some time on the CUNY website. Play with the maps. It's really, really illuminating. And of course, more data will be added. So I am delighted to introduce our panel discussion this morning. At Common Cause New York, we say that voter education and RCV implementation really requires 3 cooperative elements. It's essential that the jurisdiction here in New York City engages in official education and explanation for ranked choice voting. Another essential element are the organizations, neighborhood and community base that talk to voters and educate voters. I see many of our RCV colleagues in the audience, and we're grateful for their efforts in ensuring that their community's voters understood RCV. But another third really essential part of the education and implementation effort is the candidates and their campaigns, because nobody is talking as regularly to voters as the candidates and their campaigns. And when candidates understand and use RCV, they are providing their voters with a unique service, explaining RCV and helping voters use the full benefits of the system. So it's with great pleasure that we are able to hear from candidates today, and that we have our esteemed moderator and panelists to share their practical experiences of running an RCV election now that we've had 2 cycles with RCV in New York City. So our moderator, Basil Smikle Jr., is currently a professor of practice at Columbia School of Professional Studies, where he's director of the MS in Nonprofit Management program. His distinguished academic career follows an equally distinguished extensive political career, including a stint as the executive director of the New York State Democratic Political Committee. And our panelists this morning bring a real array of experience in campaigning. We are going to be joined shortly by the current New York City Comptroller, Brad Lander, who won his current office in New York City's first primary in 2021, and who ran for the Democratic nomination for mayor this year. Joining us also, I am delighted to say, is Scott Stringer, the former New York City Comptroller, among other elected offices of distinguished political service career, also a candidate for the Democratic nomination for mayor this year. They are joined by candidates who ran for the Democratic nomination for City Council. I'm pleased that Vanessa Aronson, the former chair of the Lexington Democratic Club, who ran in the 4th Council District, joined us this morning. And then we're also joined by Andrea Gordillo, who's an organizer and community activist who ran for the 2nd Council District. And now I'm going to ask the panelists to join us on the dais and turn it over to Basil.
No, we want to see pause under Smikle. Reserving it for the comms.
Morning, everybody.
At the end.
We'll do that one more time. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. All right. Well, let's get started. We will have some time for questions afterwards. I'm excited to hear from all of our panelists today. The first question to all of you, for those that have run before or been involved in this race or prior races, when was the first time that you realized that you had to adjust your strategy? Maybe that was even before you decided to run. Adjust your strategy for a ranked choice voting environment. We'll start here and then.
So I was a first-time candidate, and also thank you all for being here, for everybody who helped organize, all the staff that put this together. Obviously, I'm a first-time candidate, but long-time observer and supporter of ranked choice voting across the country. And so I think the first thing that it helped me realize in terms of the strategy of my approach to the campaign was it kind of discourages people. It discourages the idea that, less people should be involved in the race, so that like a head-to-head might be better. So having, you're able to consider running on a plurality of a coalition. So that's the first thing that immediately came to mind as I was gearing up to run, and also even before as an accountable observer of these sorts of races, which I think is a really important thing. I think having more choices and having more people accessing the ballot is really important and critical to the democratic process, particularly at a time where that's really at hit in a perilous state. So, yeah.
This is great.
Well, good morning, Professor, and I just want to start off and thank all the sponsors because ranked choice voting is very much alive in New York City because of Susan and Rose and Grace and just about everybody who's here today. So we should give them a big round of applause. Holly Vattenberg is controller. I audited DOT. I apologize for everything I said here. The same profession in our city. So that's a formal apology to you. And look, I was thinking this morning, I've run in 15 elections in the city, won some, lost some, but there's nothing that quite prepares you for ranked choice voting. It is a phenomenon that has tremendous benefit to the body politic. And I think one of the great moments about ranked choice voting, and by the way, I've now run 2 mayoral elections. The third time is going to be when I figure it out. But the great thing about ranked choice voting is I really believe fundamentally it engages people beyond simply showing up to vote. You couple that with campaign finance, you couple that with early voting, you also overlay the fact that you can look at all the different candidates and not just choose number one, but also think about a full ballot. And people were strategizing this election. And I thought that was really fascinating. My best moment was when I was doing a subway stop in Park Slope, and a young woman came up to me and said, "I'm ranking you number 5. I said, "Excuse me, why 5? I just want to know." She said, "Well, I'm a Gen Z." And I said, "I'm the Zoan. You should be happy with me." So why should I be happy with you? Because I'm ranking you number 5 out of respect.
Yeah, you've been an elected official longer than I've been alive. I said, you're in my book. And so I think I think fascinating about this panel is that we really can go from the map to what was really happening on the ground, and I'm looking forward to that.
That's right. Our controller is doing this. Vanessa, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, sure.
Please, I have to give a shout out for Lexington Democratic Lost and Eleanor Roosevelt's Democratic Club here out of Lexington.
Yeah, that's correct.
This is where I got my start, interestingly enough, in the mid-90s because of Carol Ann Binsler.
Oh, of course, yeah, Carol.
Yes, she invited me to come. She invited me to come to a meeting, and she would say, "I don't know how this tall black guy's going to do in his room, but I got a wonderful welcome, and she was a mentor to me for a very long time." But,
Shout out to Carol Winsler.
and Perry.
I love that. So the question, I'll repeat the question so that you get a little bit of a time, is when did we start to realize, if you run before, did we start to realize that ranked choice voting might have a difference in strategy? So I did run, this was my second time running for the same seat. I ran in 2017 when there wasn't ranked choice voting, there wasn't early voting, but our field did have a very big field. There were 9 candidates in 2017. From the beginning, I am a policy geek, so I had been closely watching ranked choice voting in France, in San Francisco, watching the 2021 race, trying to figure out what the strategy is. So I was really excited to try to apply what I thought I could learn in this race. I think first and foremost, the biggest shift in strategy is in politics, we're always looking to engage with our persuadable universe, right? In ranked choice voting, everyone's your persuadable universe. Now, you can't really count out anyone just because they say, oh, I'm on this team or I belong to this Democratic club. You really have to find a way to engage with everyone in a meaningful way. So that was something that I, had in my heart from before running for this office. And excited to share other things that we tried to apply during our race for RCV.
Control.
Thank you so much. Good morning. It's really delighted to be here. Apologies for being late. So I have been working together with Susan and Common Cause to bring ranked choice voting to New York for many years. I sponsored legislation, and I'm still trying to decide whether it's a good idea. I think in 2013 or so, after seeing a few things, honestly, what sort of, pushed me there originally was city council races, very low turnout, people winning with very low, multi-candidates and very low percentages. It was like a special election for city council in a Rockaway. I think the election that just barely elected Donovan Richards to his seat as a council member. And there were like 8 candidates and he had 20% of the vote, and the second place candidate had 19%. And that second place candidate was really out of step with the district, but there were like 8 or 9 candidates. And it just seemed like we were gonna wind up with some situations that were really messy. The runoffs were expensive, and it just was not good democracy. And so I teamed up with Common Cause to introduce legislation to bring ranked choice voting to New York City. That would have required, council passing legislation and then it going on the ballot for referendum. That is hard to do because mayors block all the council's legislation that would have to go on the ballot for referendum. So it was never really taken that seriously, but it helped prompt a dialogue. And so when there was a charter revision commission that seemed open, we teamed up to get it on the ballot, and New York was adopted overwhelmingly. So I had been fighting for it in this much more theoretical rather than personal way for quite a while. I encountered it first in 2021. Now, interestingly, in 2021, I had the progressive lane, quote unquote, more or less to myself in the controller's race. And there were a bunch of candidates, in the more moderate lane. And so in a funny way, ranked choice voting, quote unquote, worked against me in that race. I mean, I won, but my margin in the final round was a bit narrower than my margin in the first round. My lead eroded through the counting. But and then a few people asked me, like, well, then wasn't it a dumb idea for you to support ranked choice voting? Like, here, it almost defeated you. My answer always was like, you got to do the right thing for what is good democracy. My job to win a majority of votes, and much better to have that incentive than to rely on a plurality of voters. And of course, in the mayor's race that year, ranked choice voting really worked against us. So this year, from the very beginning, as of a year ago, people would say, all right, what's it going to be with ranked choice? And I would always say, look, 4 years ago, if Maya Wiley and Catherine Garcia had cross-endorsed each other down the stretch, one of them would have been mayor. We could have skipped this whole bizarre timeline. And I'm not going to let that happen again. Now, of course, in my head, and I'm thinking, I'm not going to let that happen again. I'll be in first place. The other people will cross-endorse me, then I'll win in ranked choice voting. Obviously, that's how it will work. So there's a slightly different question of like, when did I come to the realization it was important to make good on a pledge I had made and utilize ranked choice voting in a strategic way to make sure we did not wind up with someone I viewed as a completely unacceptable candidate. And that was not easy, but I was sure glad that ranked choice voting gave me the chance to do it.
How do you feel about this moment in time, Controller?
Sorry?
How do you feel about this moment in time?
This moment in time, yeah.
As you talk about what's good for democracy, and you mentioned the word coalition building, could you talk a little bit, all of you, could you talk a little bit about the strategy behind, as some would say, it is important to create these alliances to perhaps be nice to each other as candidates in the primary. Is that somewhat counterintuitive, given that if you're running for office, you have to vote for me, I'm the best of the bunch, so to speak? How does that factor into your strategy? Does that actually happen early in the campaign, or do you start thinking about that sort of coalitions and those pairings later on? Anyone?
I can jump in a little bit because I did. So when I think about strategy for ranked choice voting, I think there's sort of two ways to think about it. One is how you think about your communications, how you're going to differentiate yourself in a way that's not isolating supporters of other candidates. And then the second piece being, am I going to form an alliance with another candidate? So those were two things that were very front of my mind throughout the whole campaign. I ultimately did form an alliance and cross-endorse with another candidate. And I guess I'll back up and just share some of the logistics of my race, because I do think it's important for ranked choice voting, and I'm proud of what we did. So I did not win the city council seat, but after election day, after round one, I was 1% behind the Virginia Maloney, who ultimately won. So it was fewer than 300 votes. So we were, I think, the closest race in the city after election day. So we had that week where we didn't know what was going to happen. And I had also formed an alliance with Ben Wetzler. So we knew that we had cross-endorsed. After 4 rounds of ranked choice voting, I did pull ahead into the lead. And then in the 5th round, I ultimately lost that lead. And so I shared, not just because I want to brag, but also because I think it's important that that there were races that were this close. So two things. In my thought process about forming an alliance, I think my strategy was, yes, I do want to form an alliance. I've seen it work in other places across the country. I want to find a way in which it works for me. But I think you also want to find a genuine, authentic alliance with someone whose values and policies, that you really can promote. So throughout my race, we have a lot of forums. You're trying to suss out which of the candidates, most closely aligned with your values. I knew many of the candidates just from my work in the community. So Ben had always sort of been a natural potential partner for me. We had a lot of similar supporters. However, it's not a unilateral choice. So there was a period when I had approached Ben and asked him if he would, cross-endorse. And there was a period of time where I was unsure if he was going to say yes. And ultimately, he did say yes, but in my opinion, it was a little late because it was hard to really pool resources. We did a couple text message blasts together, but we didn't print any lit together. We didn't do any mailers together, and at the end, the momentum is sort of already there. And I think while I did get approximately 50% of his vote transfer, there was a third of his votes that ended up, what was the terminology with that ended up inactive, that's the word, or exhausted or inactive, which had they gone to me, could have changed the outcome of the race. So I do think that in retrospect, I wish I would have started that conversation earlier. I wish I would have, I wish he would have made his mind up a little earlier, but it's not something you can unilaterally do. It has to be a relationship. One more thing, you asked about sort of differentiating yourself and when you're saying, candidate, how do you say I want to partner with this person, or how are you not being negative, I think is what you're trying to say. I think generally, campaigning on your own positive contributions and what you have to offer is like a great strategy regardless. Particularly in my choice, there was one candidate in our race who refused to participate in the matching funds program pretty early. So she refused to participate in matching funds, was accepting money from sources that I did not think made sense in a Democratic primary. And I made a choice early on to call that out. I wrote an op-ed about it. I didn't think that I thought the media was sort of celebrating her capacity to fundraise versus like calling out this anti-democratic thing. And so I made a choice to call it out. I did so throughout the campaign, which frankly made me enemy number one. And the reason I share that is her votes were ultimately the last round that was transferred. So you could say that was the hill that I died on, but it was a hill that I consciously made a choice that I thought that, should the lesson for my primary be that city council races were up for sale? Like, I was not willing to let that happen. I guess similar to the choice that you made with partnering, like that was a conscious choice that I made that I knew could work against me afterwards.
Okay, Scott,
Sorry.
please. No,
I think one thing that the slide sort of indicated is no two elections and no 2 years are the same. And I think we have to recognize that as we analyze ranked choice voting. First of all, in the first movie of 2021, there were a bunch of candidates, and quite frankly, both with debates, partly because of COVID, there was not a synergy between the candidates. In fact, I think there was an overabundance of tension because we were still stuck in the mindset of, I got to get to first place. So I have to jump over Stringer and Wiley and Garcia in order to get to Adams. And I think Catherine Garcia and Yang figured it out, as Brad alluded to, very late in the game. This time, I think we all walked into this campaign recognizing, while we can disagree, we also can't cross the line, right? We can have exchanges, but we also have to be careful. And I think one of the ways that we all kind of bonded was we had a common enemy in the Cuomo campaign.
Who never showed up also, so.
So we did 35 debates, right? Brad was here, I was here, Cuomo was in the empty chair, and we all took turns saying, where are you? But what was interesting about ranked choice, and I would always say, don't over strategize the strategy, because you got to get some first place votes. At the end of the day, what I thought was very interesting was Cuomo is in first place and will not come down to the vote. Mandani gets into second place. The voters start strategizing and they say, I got to beat Cuomo. Sorry, Scott. Sorry, Brad. Sorry, whatever. It's not you. Rather vote for Lerner, but you know what? Mandani's ahead, right? I think that was part of it and a recognition. The Cuomo voter hates the progressives, hates Mandani. They're not looking at anybody else, as you see from the map. There's no second choice for Cuomo, much to his detriment. And so this race, as it relates to ranked choice voting, didn't have the same impact as 2021, even though we were all prepared to let that happen. But the voters understood it's a two-way race, and it was. I mean, I would just sit with people at the polling place, and people would say to me, I'm ranking you. And I'm like, yeah, but Cuomo can't win. I'm ranking you because I got to beat Mandani. Mandani people, especially younger voters, were like, I'm with Mandani. You know, as I mentioned earlier, my parents are going to come down later and rank you. The voters had decided before we political people understood really what was happening.
And I just want to say, for full disclosure, I worked for a candidate in 2021 that was rape plot. One of the things that it is interesting because during that time, one of the interesting dynamics in that race was that Andrew Yang was outside. And a lot of us were sending our candidate outside at that point. And that was one of the things we saw in the polling early because he was shaking hands, he was doing that retail politics, as was Eric. But we were all still inside running campaigns through Zoom.
That was actually something to really remember because, you know, as I know I don't look it, but I was 61 at the time. And I had a 9-year-old and 11-year-old. And I'm thinking to myself, mayor, or God forbid something happens during COVID and I can't be there for the kids. And that was a choice where Yang got let out, got COVID, and it became a debacle.
That's right. I want to, we got to come back to you because I do want you to respond to that same question. And then also adding to it, how did it also, you know, this conversation about partnerships and alliances, how did it also impact your, you know, what you said to donors in your fundraising?
Well, to answer the first question, I would also underscore what my fellow panelists say, that there are macro conditions that as a candidate and as a campaign, you don't always fully understand how to grapple or how to strategize about. So there's always going to be questions or lessons learned or takeaways that you would have done differently. But there are two things I would also bring up. The kind of, I would say maybe is a little bit of a challenge and the other one's more of an opportunity. The first being that a lot of, like, the reality is a lot of the candidates want to win, right? And so it becomes difficult for a candidate to trust another campaign and exchange information and logistics and all of those things.
Because you have to do that. You have to really sort of partner with them.
Right, yeah. And then the other thing is, I think in some ways, civic associations, institutions, labor unions, the more they get ahead of this strategy and are looking at the macro conditions a little bit more separated out from those kind of tensions of trust among campaigns, they tend to have a little bit of a little bit more of an ability to engage ranked choice. And I think that as candidates, you know, there's a lot of cooperation with those institutions that's shaking, like, you know, certain labor unions. I myself got endorsements by more, co-endorsements by more progressive labor unions, the nurses unions, the UAW. And then obviously looking at the mayoral race, the Dream Coalition was a big part of that.
And what was the Dream Coalition?
Don't rank Andrew Cuomo or Eric Adams or Eric Adams or Andrew Cuomo. So I think that was something that was really interesting to me, and all of those civic associations, whether they're Democratic clubs, which in my experience were a little bit more reluctant to engage with ranked choice, and then, you know, different civic associations that make decisions based on kind of what kind of city council, what kind of mayorality they want to see. And then as far as talking to donors, my race was interesting because there's a lot of different combinations of based on around like identity, like political orientation. But in the end, I think around 80% of the vote went to a progressive person. And so if you look at, the donations, you'll see that's also a reality. A lot of people wanted all three of us to be in the council seat. So it was actually pretty natural for me. But I think maybe to some of the other candidates that might have been different.
Yeah, Brad, the question about alliances, but also donors, because you're dealing with donors all across the city and different pockets of different types of donors.
Yeah. And, in relationship to New York City's campaign matching fund rules, I mean, the combination, I believe, of ranked choice voting and campaign finance matching funds makes it much more possible for a broader and more diverse array of candidates to run. That's a good thing for democracy and can also be confusing for voters because you wind up with more candidates and you don't have a lot of information. The question around alliances, one real challenge, is you don't have the information you really need to figure out some of these strategy questions until pretty late in the race. In the mayor's race, there's a lot of polling, but not in council races or other races. So I think it always is going to be a bit unpredictable. We're still new in ranked choice voting and don't have that much experience, but I think it will generally be there'll be a lot of unpredictability. If you have a lot of candidates, if you have ranked choice, and if you don't have a lot of polling and data, I don't know how people are going to make alliances early in the day. And in our race, there were, even though, as Scott says, there was this one sort of overarching dynamic, like everyone versus Andrew was one important ranked choice dynamic. Now, that's important to remember. That doesn't mean like ranked choice voting is nice. It encourages alliances. But, I think actually the primary motivation of the alliance of most candidates here was against one of the candidates. But even there, things were sort of shifting. So, the Working Families Party put 4 of us on their slate. Then, of course, on the Upper West Side and in Brownstone, Brooklyn, Scott and I were, people that a lot of folks were considering and thinking about how to do that, especially in relationship as the race closed and Zoran and Andrew were the top 2 candidates. And then, I made the decision to cross endorse Zoran quite late in the race. I mean, that was only about 10 days out. That was at the point it just became very clear to me it was, Zoran versus Andrew. And I had a strong opinion on that and could do something to help influence its outcome. I approached it really just like ranked choice mathematics. Like I've said this before, like I didn't go into it, I went into it with like, if Andrew Cuomo is mayor, I'll never get a job again in New York City. You know what I mean? Like, I think it would be more public interested than that. Like that's just bad for us all. Not that I'm gonna get a job in New York City. Bad for us all if he is mayor of New York City.
There's a few
Individual things that for me. So but what was so fascinating was when we did it, it was received with a lot of warmth as it's like an expression of the possibility of politics as a team sport, something more like solidarity than just like ranked choice math, and something opposed to a real sense of politics as a ego-driven, sour, selfish thing. I thought it was so notable on primary day that both Cuomo and Adams, who wasn't on the ballot but did vote, really went out of their way to communicate, I am only ranking myself and no one else, just like, and here we had this much more warm alliance. And, I've said this a few times because people have said, wow, like politicians never do that. And I was like, well, normal people play team sports all the time. It's like you try out for a team and you'd like to be the shortstop and the coach chooses someone else to be the shortstop. And you don't say, I quit. You say, great, I could play right field or second base, and you keep showing up and you get to be part of a team that hopefully achieves some shared goals. Like, that's a normal human thing to do. It is true that the people that choose to run for office generally approach it as an individual sport and not a team sport. And that is one good thing of ranked choice voting. So,
You know, Brad raises something that's very interesting about ranked choice, which is it the vehicle to win? And at what point does it become a vehicle to soften the blow, right? So kudos to Brad, who looked at it and said, if not me, then who? And I also think for local candidates, you make the decision, this is not my time, but there's term limits. And if I can't win my first time, or even my second time, there's a role for me as I start getting better known. I'm not gonna go have a fight with Virginia Maloney. I'm going to, if I don't win, I'm going to be careful not to cross the line. In my experience in politics, having run against Elliot Spitzer and Eva Moskowitz, I mean, that was politics that rip their head off and don't stop until it's done, and then stomp on them in every debate. That's the politics. Second, in my career, think I've run against just about everybody in New York City politics. I don't run one-on-one races. I have 8 people I run against. So if you add it all up, one day I added it up and I said, my God, I've run against 40 people, like, and they're still around, you know, and it was a different kind of campaign. So I think that at what point does ranked choice voting sort of say, I'm not winning this time. It's not a strategy anymore. It's like, how do I emerge as a good person, which I think is legitimate, Brad's right, in politics, and how do I lay the groundwork for what's to come for me? And I think I struggle with that a little bit generationally because I just come from the world of Washington Heights, Upper West Side, uptown politics, which is, you know, we run until we run into the ground, we sort it out later. And I think this is maybe a good moment, but I don't think it's necessarily strategy to win.
You talk, one of the other sort of aspects of it, we talk about donors. There's also a cottage industry of campaign consultants. Why is the disdain that comes with how do you start here and work? How have the actually, sorry, Vanessa. How have the consultants adapted to this environment, if at all? And I'm sorry, in addition to consultants, I mean like the pollsters and the media and how media reporting on it, so on and so forth, media consultants.
So I worked with Chris Sosa at Sosa Strategies. He is a one person operation, so I think it might be a slightly different experience. I will share that there were voices that said when I was considering a partnership or an alliance, said don't show, or that could show a sign of weakness. Partnering with someone who's cross-endorsing. Because I guess, in an ideal world, you don't want to cross-endorse with the front runner because then you won't get their votes, right? So if you're, so that was something that came to me from different political voices who were advising different capacities, whether it be male. And I went against that. I said, no, I don't believe you. I think that this is something we need, that's important. That said, I do think there, mail firm, for example, we had to really coach them to say, don't say vote Vanessa, say rank Vanessa #1. Same with, any types of comms. I went in, I had taken some trainings on ranked choice voting. Like I said, it was something I personally am interested in. So I went in knowing we have to shift some of this, but I had to remind the vendors or consultants that it's a slightly different flavor, that you can't just slap the same thing that you do in, across the country on. We have to be a little bit more nuanced about it. So I used Red Horse Strategies, and they, I think overall, I've spoken to a lot of consultants over the years. I think that they are also generally focused on just getting you to number one, right, with the voters. But I will say, when you do a ballot draw, everybody has a different ranking on or different order on the ballot. And so I got, out of just sheer luck, I was number one on the ballot. So it was very easy for me. I was like very particular with my team, my volunteers, my canvassers, to just say, I hope I'm number one on the ballot, and I hope you're number one vote too. And so, I was very particular also about messaging, graphics, and that sort of thing about how to lay that out in mail and literature. And I think it was helpful. I think you'd have to ask consultants themselves, but I think there is a little bit of back and forth. I think as candidates here, I think we're maybe a little bit more friendly. And I can't speak for all of them, but in my experience, a lot of them are similarly focused on how to get your candidate to win. And in a way, perhaps not always, they're perhaps not always looking at all the possible permutations and possibilities of engaging ranked choice. And then, of course, they also similarly are like, you have to contrast from the front runner early on. So, yeah.
I just want to add moderator's privilege here, because there was just to talk a little bit about the partnership with the consultants piece, because it was reported in the paper when I was doing Ray McGuire, we were working with Catherine Garcia to do a partnership towards the very end. And one of the difficult conversations with across the T's was, okay, because it's not unilateral, if we do this, what do I get? Who do I get out of this? Like, what constituency are you bringing to me? Because it might be that this only benefits you, right? And so that conversation, that's a difficult conversation. Very, very difficult. That happens, that you try not to have it happen at the principal level, that happens at the consultant level. And that's a really tough conversation.
Harder to do at the local level. I think the mayoral races, with New York City being a minority city, there's a lot more combinations of coalitions. I thought about that at the local level.
Yeah, absolutely. We still have a little bit of time, but I'll ask us to be as close to lightning round type of responses as possible. We touched on it a little bit during our conversation, but Brad, I'll start with you. How much work went into not only educating staff, but your voters of now what ranked choice voting is and what they should do? That seems like that has to be a very significant part of the operation.
Yes, it was, it is. There is the following conundrum in voter education and ranked choice voting. Everyone knows how to rank their preferences, and it is not hard, and so like that part of it is straightforward. And then trying to explain the counting and the strategy is almost impossible. And you can't give people like confidence in it. And so then you go back to trying to say, just rank your preferences. Like the best thing for you to do is, of course, we're trying to think strategically as a campaign. Best thing you could do is like rank me first and rank other people in the order you want them, but like vote your preferences. And yet that turned out to be really hard because people were like, no, something's going on here and I don't get it. It's fine to see counting is weird and some strategic thing I don't understand. Explain it to me. And it doesn't work to be like, no, don't think like that. Just rank your preferences because then they're sure you're right. So I have found this a challenge. We do need more ranked choice education, but there is this conundrum because really what you want people to do is just rank their preferences, but they're very suspicious and it's hard either to explain to them why they shouldn't be or convince them that there's not actually some funny business going on.
Sure. Just yesterday, I told Susan this already. I saw a neighbor who I hadn't seen since the election, and she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry you didn't win." And then she's like, "This ranked choice voting." I'm like, "No, that's not the reason I didn't win. Like, there was nothing wrong with ranked choice voting. I promised you was good, and anything was my chance at winning." So there's a huge mistrust, and a lot of it was there were campaigns in my race who told people there was another team who paired up and they said rank us and no one else. And to me, that like broke my heart. That's disenfranchising voters. So I was very passionate about just, rank everyone, continue to put everyone on the ballot. So you just got to keep getting that message out. And then I sent a lot of people that campaign finance or Lego video. So cute. It's really good. Look it up. Send it to your friends.
Sarah and Jess, I have a question to you. Quick questions. Should we, and do you see on the horizon us getting this to the general election? As opposed to this?
I mean, do you want me to? I hope so, because I see this as good for democracy. Couple of just quick points I just want to make along lines with folks have said. So let's give props to the Mondani primary campaign. First, I mean, I have to say that their consultants and Mondani himself figured out something that we have not figured out in this city with all the fancy consultants, with all the big money firms. He understood with his army of young people that we can bring out a new group of build a new electorate through the combination of campaign finance, RCV, ranked choice voting, and good old fashioned door knocking that has really been off the table since the height of political clubs. It was phenomenal. And I really hope, Susan, and probably that we get that campaign to come here. I want to have a first row seat to hear what they did. My consultants, I love them, said the following: you're running, people know you. All you got to do is get everybody over 50 to vote for you. Let me show you the slide. 50-year-olds vote, 60-year-olds vote, 65-year-olds vote. If they're still around, they've been voting for you 30, just get them. How do we get them? Get on channel 247, right? Regular TV. I said, what about young people? Young people don't. Twitter's dead, Elon Musk, and videos are so yesterday, right? I announced for mayor with an open letter in the New York Times. Does anyone remember that? Thanks, my wife is here. She sent it to her mother, my husband's in the past. Did that matter when you had the Zoran video saying, why'd you vote for Trump? And then he's in a halal car, and we're like, oh God, Harry. So I think we have to look at what an emerging electorate looks like, a diverse electorate. This is an exciting moment for the next generation of leadership. In the now the congressional seat, people said to me, what about that race? I said, look, this is a generational change election. We need to protect Social Security, but we don't need someone on Social Security to protect us. And I think that's something that
We'll just add where you think RCV can expand, and I have a follow-up question, please.
Sure. I agree a lot with what the former controller said, and to elaborate a little bit, I was running against a former Congress member, a sitting assembly member. So I ran a really tough race, and most of my campaign staff and volunteers or similarly young people. And I'll say that there is a bit of generational difference and strength here. The Mondani campaign, most of his consultants and advisors were really young, like under 35. And so they were able to kind of look at the nuts and bolts of the campaign of campaigning in a different way. But I will say though that there is some more work to be done kind of at the local level. Oftentimes, and Vanessa, maybe you have the same experience. When I was just canvassing on the streets, a lot of people were thinking I was running against Mamdani. I was like, listen, I'm not running for mayor. So there was like a bit of education on like, you know, the importance of local elections, to be done. But yeah, to answer your question, yes, I agree.
So last question, and we'll go to the audience for questions. You mentioned, Scott, you mentioned term limits earlier, and we're now talking about RCV. What's the next revolution in our elections that will make it more democratic, maybe create more partnerships, maybe bring in more young voters or more energy to voting? What's the next sort of?
I think we made tremendous headway. And look, I still remember going to that press conference with Susan and Rose when we in fact announced in 2021 that there was going to be ranked choice voting, and people thought it was like some revolution was starting. And again, we really changed the dynamic here. But look, we do have some issues to tackle. Think about this. In this campaign, the outside expenditures, the Cuomo campaign spent $27 million, maybe as much as $30 million in ID PACs. The real estate industry, it was $250,000 a person to play there. DoorDash spent $1.2 million in expenditures for that campaign when the rest of us were hustling $250 every single day. $30 million is impossible to compete with, which is why the Mamdani campaign was so phenomenal. But this is the trend. The real estate industry, the business industry. I mean, we had, I think, who was the one that took out an ad against you, me and Mamdani? Well, who was
That was DoorDash.
That was DoorDash as well. $1 million. It was a very nice ad, by the way. I thought we were actually pretty good.
Was that DoorDash or Airbnb?
That was Airbnb.
It was Airbnb.
Yeah, and this was the second time they hit me with $1 million when I was controller. They did the same thing. But I think if we're going to really level the playing field, we're going to have to get our arms around this kind of spending and direct spending. I mean, Bloomberg spends $10 million in the last 2 weeks of the election. We have to clean that up.
Any other?
This is a little bit tangential, but I would really love to see a little bit more of like reforms around ballot initiatives, and making them a little bit more transparent. I'm not going to go into the nuts and bolts about the approvals between the mayor and the city council and the governor about how to get one done. But the reality is a lot of people are very distrustful of politicians. But when it comes to issues, there are certain things like reproductive justice, economic justice, election integrity that are actually overwhelmingly popular. But when you pair that with, you know, a governor, a mayor, or city council are not, right? So that's something that I've really loved to advance in some ways.
Vanessa, right?
I was gonna say the same thing about money, more regulation, or I wish there were a world we could get rid of IEs. I hope that one message from this 2025 primary is that money didn't buy elections. You know, the city council races where the candidates opted out of public funding, like mine and another one, the candidates didn't win. With the mayoral race, you know, the insane amounts of spending didn't make a difference. And I hope that that's a message that gets back to them, that that's a horrible waste of money. But that's something I really, you know, New York has been a beacon of what politics could look like with the matching funds program, which with RCV. So just spread that message that the more that the money's not worth it, go do something else with it.
Just in terms of what's the next thing, I guess if we're saying what's happening this week, so, you know, everyone knows, I mean, the Charter Revision Commission proposed for the ballot, proposal to shift local elections from odd years to even years, which will dramatically boost turnout, and that is a positive thing from a democracy point of view. It will make local races harder to draw attention to when you're running in the same year a president or a governor's race is taking place. And on balance, I believe it's the right thing to do to have more people turning out. So I support the change, but I don't think we should ignore the challenge it will present for like, city council candidates already struggling to get any attention to their races to have to do that down ballot in a presidential election year on the same date. But bizarrely, who knows whether it will be on the ballot or not, because the 5 Republican Board of Elections commissioners and Frank Sedillo, I did not have that on my like bingo card, like Sedillo betraying Eric Adams to like stab his charter revision commission in the back. And the 6 of them are in a just like totally illegal way going to apparently not put the charter revision proposals on the ballot because they don't like them, and I mean they're welcome to vote against them in November. So not only should we switch our elections to be in even years so we have higher turnout, we should reform the New York City Board of Elections because it remains like the system if we were to assign, like if you had your AI designed to be something that best combines corruption and incompetence, it will give you the New York City Board of Elections, and the state legislature and the governor should reform it.
You raise a very interesting question. I agree with you on the Board of Elections, but I think, and this hurt me at Citizens Union because they couldn't figure out having a real conversation about this, but not you phrased before you got there. But I think it's a colossal mistake to rush to align the election process. You're talking about a presidential election, congressional elections in even years, and then you're going to put a mayor's race on the ballot. Big mistake. It will overhype the national at the expense of the local. And in some ways, a mayor's race is just as important. I think they went too far. I think we shouldn't put it on the ballot now. I do think we have to get rid of Frank Sedillo, the Board of Elections, and keep the referendum on the ballot. It was well thought out, the charter revision. But I just think odd even years, no one is really thinking about this. There's not been enough data on this. And I think sometimes you rush to reform something you don't understand. And I'd be very cautious about it.
Well, even before I ran the state party, I've always said that state and local elections, we don't pay nearly enough attention to them. And especially now, what's happening nationally and so much focus being pushed backwards to states. Really important stuff. Let's go to please.
Hi, I'm Pete.
question.
I know you since you were my senator. Here's the deal. Council. I said council. Okay, can you hear me? Okay. I want to talk about 3, 4, and 5. Because the point is gonna come just like this election was about 2, 3, and 4, and 5. They'll put somebody on 5 if he can't live it. And if that ends up being 4 and 5, that's the second part of the message. Rank everybody that you can live with. 2, you guys were all on the last debate. That last debate is where I filled out my 3, 4, and 5. I'll listen to you and I'll shuffle nothing down. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. I guess that my wife is saying that's not a question. Okay. Now I'll give up the mic.
Thanks, sir. There's a person. Yes, and then
I'll just +1 here, though. I do think that's a useful thing that I try to say to people, like, rank your candidates in order up to 5. Everyone that you would like to see mayor more than someone else. Like the idea is you might be the deciding vote. Yes, like you put someone 5th, and if it gets to that last round and you putting that voter that put Scott in 5th at Park Slope, they gotta be glad they were the deciding vote for him. So I don't put people on you don't want, put people on who you, in the order you want them. Where you would be proud to have as a deciding voter. That's rather my secret strategy. Just everyone ranks me 5.
But it's supposed to everybody you can have a beer with. Isn't that who you can have a beer with?
Yes, thank you. The moderator asked this question already, but it was got lost in some other storytelling, but, ranked choice voting in the general election, is there real support for that? And then I guess I would ask, because panelists right now may not be promoting that, an elected position, but I can do it another way. But I would ask the good government groups that are here, what are you going to do about that? Because clearly it's not democracy if the 1 in 5 unaffiliated voters cannot vote their preferences. And then maybe down the road, would you consider multi-member districts?
So, yeah. I didn't get any quick responses to it.
I mean, I support ranked choice voting in general elections. And look, I mean, in this general election, it would not help my candidate, but it's still the right thing to do. So yes, I support ranked choice voting in general elections. I think at the time, we just kind of maybe made the mistaken assumption, like there's too many parties and therefore you'll have a majoritarian general election and you don't really need ranked choice to get you there. But this year and other years shows that's not the case. And so I would support it. And things like multi-member districts and other, things that move us more toward like proportional representation, I do think would be really valuable. We've got a crisis of, there's a challenge though, I guess I'll just say, we have a crisis of trust in our democratic institutions, and we need to do things that will open up and restore that trust. One challenge is when you change things, then people get more suspicious. So how do we promote democratic experimentation while building more trust? This is a really good challenge for all of us.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi.
This Michael behind me.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Carlos. I work with Dominicanos USA, and my question is based, with like senior community from our senior Latino and especially Philippine communities that they have like decades voting just for one candidate. So, what strategy we can use to shift and change the mindset of our elderly? They have like a language barrier, and they have now the knowledge barrier that we only use ranked choice voting for one election every 4 years. So how we can change the mindset in our like elderly community and senior community? Thank you.
So the education, particularly with senior voters, getting them to understand the process, and especially if there's a language barrier, do you see enough being done there?
During one of the charter revisions, we created in the city something called the Voter Assistance Unit, right? Where multiple candidates, public advocate and others have representation on. It has been a worthless vehicle and should be charged with this responsibility to make sure that different communities are represented. This is the most diverse city in the world. There's 200 languages spoken here, so it's not just the Dominican Latino community, but it's the Bangladesh community. We spend the whole time talking about it. I think we have to invest in the Voter Assistance Unit and in the good government groups in a nonpartisan way to educate. This man said something, I think, I agree with the first part of what you said, which is about education. It has to start in high school. We have to engage because these younger people.
Start in kindergarten, child.
Yeah, well, I did that.
Voting is important.
Look, I did that with my kids. They had to go out and give out literature starting in first.
And one other thing, if you're a parent, take your
I
kids.
said, I don't want to get you all revved up, but I just want to give you a little bit. But I do think we as a city have got to, the next mayor has got to really empower and invest in this kind of infrastructure.
One I wanted to add, Andrea spoke a little bit about all of the different organizations that endorse, and that more organizations this time chose to endorse more than one candidate. Some local organizations or political clubs used ranked choice voting for their own endorsement process. And I think that's some of the ways that we can just practice. Now, one of the complications is that ranked choice voting is not something you can, or it's harder to do by paper human count ballot. So I don't know if any of the local organizations, if there's ways we could partner with some of the online systems to make ranked choice voting free or low cost to nonprofits, political clubs, so that they can practice, so that their members understand what it looks like going into the voter booth, and that their endorsement process can reflect a ranking that helps inform them when they're going into the voter booth.
Yeah, I wanted to address your question a bit because I ran in a district that's a core Latino community, and over the past 10 years that I've lived there, the Dominican community has also grown a lot, and was quite a lot of new Americans that were voting for the first time in my election. And so, many of them had no idea what ranked choice voting was, and it was literally incumbent upon me. I was the only Latina in my race. I was bilingual, so it was literally incumbent on me and my campaign to just educate people almost one-on-one and look in forums. But I agree with what the controller said, or the former controller said, which is that, the collapse of local media has really made it very, very difficult to run these hyper-local campaigns. And so investments in things like local newspapers, ads in La Mega, Facebook, WhatsApp, all these different communities have different ways of communicating. So it's really incumbent upon government to take a look at this and try and empower folks through those avenues.
Thank you. Are we,
Aaron? Yeah.
one
last question.
one last question?
Okay, sure. Hello, this is directed to you, Lacker, Carol Warden from Citizen Action. You mentioned that, and we all know that you cross-endorsed with Mamdani within the last 10 days or so. Is there, and folks were very, like myself, we're very pleased with that. Is there a world in which, had you cross-endorsed earlier, that we may have seen more traction earlier? The result might not have changed necessarily, but you might have gone further along. You may have broken out of the dim had you cross-endorsed with someone else earlier.
Maybe what had, probably the thing that got me the most attention in the race was when the ICE agents arrested me.
If that had happened a couple months earlier,
But I'll just say one thing I observed here that I think is another conundrum, because so I was on this slate, with 3 other candidates, with Mamdani, Zeller Myrie, and Adrienne Adams for much longer, several months. And really from a ranked choice math point of view, there's kind of no technical difference between being on a slate with someone and you're saying rank, us in the 1, 2, 3, 4 in terms of fighting against Andrew Cuomo, than there is doing a 2-person cross endorsement. From a just ranked choice mathematics point of view, they aren't different, and yet they are received very differently. Something about the 2-person cross endorsement tapped into an energy that was much more than the slate had been. And I'm still trying to understand that, honestly. That's something in us, that people respond to more emotionally than it is what your consultants will tell you strategically. So yeah, what would it look like? It's not, what would it look like for 2 candidates to much earlier run in something that was more like a partnership? That has not yet happened in New York City ranked choice. And I don't know what it would take and how someone would decide that was a good idea or what it would take. But I think it's a really interesting question.
Can I just mention just to follow up on that, because I think, again, when you look at what happened in this election, and I think it was strategy, which was the consultants, whether it was Cuomo or Mamdani, as the polling started to create this 2-person dynamic, I think people using ranked choice voting again could say, okay, I got to be Cuomo, I'm with Mamdani, first and foremost. And the groups went with Mamdani, and they may have gone with other people if the polling was much more split. But once it became 2, I think we had a different dynamic. And what ranked choice voting did for people is do I really think Mamdani's my super first choice? No. But I can also assuage my guilt by ranking somebody else. And I think we have to figure that piece out, because a couple of early polls create a 2-person race. That, I think, creates a danger. If you look at the 1977 mayor's race, the winner won by 1 point. They had a runoff back then. If you look at other races, it was much closer. 2021, If you look at Catherine and you look at Maya, I mean, they almost beat Adams, but Adams was only at 30% in the final round. I would love to see data from the experts on, is this a trend that we create a two-way race where ranked choice voting is not essential? Or was this an anomaly election? Different, every election is different. Just ask you to think about it.
Fascinating panel. Thank you all very much. Now we'll hear from Executive Director of Citizens Union, my friend Grace Brown.
Thank you. Thank you, Basil. Thank you to all the panelists and everyone who's here. So I'm Grace Rao. I'm the Executive Director of Citizens Union, New York's oldest good government group. And I joined there just in June. Pretty quiet time to be leading an organization and being part of conversations like this. Just to close us out, a few thoughts. Really such a fascinating conversation. Before doing this work, I was a political journalist covering politics, some of those 15 Scott Sprayer campaigns and Brad Lander's prior races. And I have to say, for me, ranked choice voting now will be forever sort of connected in my head with the image of Brad and Zoran Mamdani on city bikes on Prospect Park West, biking side by side in the final stretch of that mayoral primary, which is certainly an image that as a former political reporter, I never could have imagined seeing two former competitors sort of teaming up like that. But that's really what the kind of politics that ranked choice voting has brought us, which I think is hugely beneficial for our city and our democracy. I have to hope that maybe our next conversation in here will be about even year elections and the proposal that's on the ballot. So thank you for engaging on that. Just a quick plug for this election reform, which is really important. You know, this group is so plugged in and cares about our local elections. You're here, you want to geek out on ranked choice voting. It's awesome. We're all turning out to vote in our local elections, but the vast majority of registered voters in New York are not. And when we look at the data since the 90s, there has just been a steady decline in turnout in our local races. The status quo is not working. And we know that we can double turnout, maybe even go better than that if we shift our election calendar. It also has the benefit of saving money, which is a net positive. And we also know from other cities that have implemented this, and it's been really successful, that voters, by and large, again, not this group, but voters by and large do their homework just before they go to the polls. So people do read up on the candidates and the races before they're going out to vote, and they are much more likely to vote in a presidential year. So that's my brief plug there. But really, thank you all for sharing your thoughts. Thank you to Rose, to Polly, to Susan, to Steve, to Basil, to all of the panelists. And we have an exciting general election ahead of us. So thank you.